Okay, looks like it is going through. Let me give it like another half minute. Thank you everybody for waiting so patiently with me. I appreciate that. Okay. Here we are. Awesome. Okay, we are live. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Sudha Jamte, and this is Weeklywed from Business School of AI, and our weekly global speaker series. And I'm just going to get started because we have a very exciting speaker. And thank you, Yash, for letting me host this time. Okay. Let me bring our speaker on here. Okay. Awesome. So we've been talking a lot about LLM. We've done 4 different webinars on LLM. We've had a session on RAG. And so this seems the right time for us to go to the next step. So for those of you who are joining us here on Zoom, thank you for your time. You can speak up, or if you don't want to be in the recording, since we are streaming live, you can actually go through the chat here. And we will be streaming. We have actually started streaming this on LinkedIn and YouTube. I'm not watching YouTube, but we'll use the recording to share it in our newsletter. But on LinkedIn, I will be monitoring. So if you want to tag a friend, if you want to ask a question, if you're working in that space, we want to keep this as conversational. I'm going to bring your questions here. For the most part, I'm going to let our speaker do their presentation, and then I will direct questions. And those of you who are here, if you don't want to be on the recording, you don't need to speak up. If you're comfortable with that, that's okay. And you can introduce yourself because we have a very global group. Introduce yourself, and you can post your questions, and I'll bring it up to the speaker at the right time. I'm dying to ask questions, and I have a lot of questions. So the topic today is about building LLM and bias mitigation. We have spoken a lot about bias mitigation and generally inclusive AI from a regular machine learning concept. And with LLM, we've not had a conversation about that. And if you remember, the company, the product that I'm talking about is Latimer. And I remember on Feb 1st, Google had James Baldwin as the image on their doodle. And I asked about James Baldwin to some people, and I said, okay, let's go ask LLM or a ChatGPT, and we did not get the best of answers. And so I went to Latimer, and we've had discussion about how do you actually fine tune data sets, right? Past data sets which are biased. We just can't like pump in, new data that is unbiased and expect it to become clean. And so how do you do that in LLM is a problem that everybody is fighting. Everybody who's building an LLM is saying, how do I build a validation engine so that it is not biased? And we saw that Google in their vision model was blamed for going too far and calling that biased also. So there's no right way, but we got somebody who has the answers. So let me give the stage to Malur Narayan. He's a technical advisor for Latimer, and I had such a fun conversation about his work on building Latimer. So he's going to talk to us about building Latimer and how they're doing bias mitigation. And I'll just give it directly so that I can get off the stage. 1 second. Let me just remove myself here. Malur, if you want to introduce yourself, I remember we called you CTO, and you're not CTO, you're the technical advisor. So I want to clarify that the opinions are yours, not of your employer. And please talk to us and teach us how you built Latimer. What are the challenges? Thank you.
Sure. Let me thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Sudha, for the opportunity to be here. The CEO of Latimer, John Pasmore, couldn't be here, so and this, since it was more of a technical conversation, I decided to step in, and since I've been involved in helping them build this platform. Let me start with the presentation, a little bit about
Yes.
myself.
Yes.
Um, so, I've been in the industry for over 30 years. My AI machine learning journey started in 1990 with some research that I did in Canada, developing one of the early reinforcement learning algorithms called ASTA, Adaptive Set Training Algorithm, which in those days was very pioneering, and involved a number of interesting things, like being able to use rewards for behavior, etc. So back in those days, AI was really not that fashionable, so it wasn't exactly uh, a very popular thing. And then over the years, I've kind of kept in touch with in the area, even though I've moved on to other roles. But in the last few years, probably the last 6, 7 years, I've been more involved in starting to help startups with as an advisor, but also helping them build AI platforms. And this, Strides or AI, which I co-founded with Rika Nakazawa, and then Latimer, who I met, the founder I met a few years ago. When he invited me and asked me to be part of this journey, it was really exciting. And I think it's really something that, especially in the last 18 months or so, that LLMs have become the rage. It gave us an opportunity for us to really drive this and see what's the art of possible. Um, so that's a little bit about background about myself. In terms of Latimer is a subsidiary of a company called Future Sum, which John leads, and it's the purpose is to build AI for AI tools to mitigate cultural and historical bias for the advancement of all people, uh, to level the playing field as far as AI is concerned. I'll keep the presentation short, and then we can do a lot of Q&A after that. So what is Latimer? Latimer is a large language model trained with diverse histories and inclusive voice that speak to black and brown narratives. So the data sets are one of the things that really make us different, and I'll get into that a little bit. Why would we build something like this? It's, as we all know, even with the recent Gemini fiasco, and we've seen this a lot with especially the multimodal language models, where there's a tremendous amount of bias because of the fact that many of the LLMs have been trained on public domain data, which is largely mainstream and mainstream popular culture. So how do you, and in order for it to be more representative of the larger world population, it's important that the LLMs be trained on data and history that is factual and more representative of the larger world population. And that's the reason why. And I think that's important for companies. It's important for organizations. It's important for education, uh, and to have an accurate representation of that. And how are we doing that? We're using we're using a RAG approach to the. I'll get into that a little bit, but more specifically, we've gone and curated data from a variety of different sources. Professor Asante, who is championing this for us, is we've all his textbooks are on the our source of data for the platform. We've had an agreement with Amsterdam News, which is one of the largest Black newspapers. So over 100 years of news articles in there, and a variety of other dissertations and other articles over the last several years that have been uploaded on there to form the basis of the data. So when you ask a question about any topic, particularly when it relates to Black history or culture, it the LLM gives you a more targeted answer, and also gives it to you in a tone that is more representative of how you would speak to that audience. Latimer is named after the Black inventor Louis Latimer. And John, who's the CEO, he himself is a technologist. I've known him for a few years now, and he's somebody that went back to school to study computer science. He's had an arts degree and then went back to Columbia to study computer science. So only to be so that he could be known as a technical founder. So and he's fairly technical himself. So this is a great thing, and of course him and I both are very passionate about social impact and about making sure that all the voices are heard. Yeah. So that's kind of the origin here. Um, Howard Latimer was an American inventor and a patent draftsman. Many of his while his work is not really well known in the mainstream media, which is why it was important to name the company after the product is after him. Um, there's a lot of history there, and you can learn from that directly from Latimer as well. This is the team. John's the CEO, and some of us are helping John in terms of to build this product. Professor Asante at Temple University, myself, Elsa, who's the creative director, and then Vijay, who's a data scientist with having studied at Harvard and MIT. So
So I want to add one thing, Malur, because I somehow came across Latimer before it was launched, and I was on the wait list, and I was thinking why the name Latimer, and exactly to your point about bias that the regular LLM doesn't tell me, I could not find out about this inventor Latimer at all. And
wow.
even if you go to Google today and you say, who is Latimer? I was not thinking it was first a who. I was like, what is Latimer or just Latimer? And it didn't lead me anywhere, right? And when I said, who is Latimer? Even today, if you go to Google and you say, who is Latimer? It says Latimer is a fellow of Clare College, Cambridge, blah, blah, blah. And it gives me another person who is not this inventor that is not showing in the list. And the same, because the same thing that ChatGPT is bringing from the web, I don't believe it is going to show Howard Latimer as the
Yeah,
person. So
I
yeah,
mean that's just one example, right? There's so many pieces of history that have been suppressed because history is always what we know as history today is really what is one version of it, right?
yeah,
A great example is a sad example is the Tulsa massacre that only became widely known in the last few years, but before
yeah,
that it was largely unknown to people beyond the immediate community that was affected.
yeah. And the
So
same thing going forward also, right? I mean, if you had to go and find your news article, 100 years old article from a specific targeted source, and if we are talking about inclusion, and we'll talk more about when you get to the bias mitigation stage, it should not be so hard for companies. And you mentioned Gemini. I wanted to call out to the people who are not aware of this. Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, everything that creates image generation is taking it from the internet and is biased against Black people. And Gemini,
and women
yeah,
as well, right? Women, black
and
people, and
women, yeah,
other cultures as well as
that's true. That's true.
neurodiversity. It's not inclusive.
That is true. That is true. In fact,
In fact, a great example is the
yeah,
Adobe Firefly. I about a month ago, I tried all the different tools. Adobe Firefly was one of them, and it was shocking to me that when you type "show me a doctor" or "show me a," you can go through all the professions. I tried about 10 of them,
yeah,
and it'll give you four images. Um, all of them are men, right?
yeah,
And three of them will be white men, and then the fourth one may be somebody who's of a different race. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
very even even if you type programmer, even though we know that a large part of the programmers are Asians, uh, it's interesting how it portrays those type of queries.
yeah, yeah. We have, I mean, published research on the whole misogyny aspect of AI, and there is some work going on. But the mitigation part of it, again comes from the bias of the person, right? If somebody is going to say, I'm going to add bias mitigation to make sure that women are shown in all professions, then I'm going to say that, and I'm going to want to see it the way I believe is the right mix, right? Because that is my bias that I'm going to feed into the system. So it's fascinating how you would go through that. And to the Gemini story, Gemini has done some fine tuning or something, because of which when you generate an image of a person in Gemini, it is not showing enough white people. And so somebody's try to break it and try to actually try find I think during the World War II they were trying to generate images of that period, and then they said how come they were showing more black people in Germany or something like that. And so Google has temporarily pulled it out from creating images of people. You can still go create images of puppies and stuff that I've been showing on online. But this has become a problem for companies because they don't want to be sued. They don't want they want the focus on their new LLM and their chatbot to be on what it is supposed to do. Definitely they don't want it to be, upsetting any segment of their customers, but from a very practical perspective. But there's also a whole ethical side to that. So I'll give it back to you. I just wanted to comment on the Gemini thing. When you just call Gemini racist, I would not call Gemini racist. I found that kind of funny that it was called racist, but it is not inclusive enough. And the end goal for us is to represent the world of 8 billion people, and not 300,000 people, just because that's documented on the internet in a way that the
Yeah, I
large
think part
model.
of the problem is that, Google has obviously earned a lot of trust through its search, right?
Yeah.
So people um, believe whatever is on Google. So you have to be very careful how what kind of information you put out there. In fact, there
Yeah.
was a tweet by Elon Musk, and people are always going to try to break AI system because it's early days, so everybody's going to try doing different things. So there was a tweet where he was, well, reposted something about um, they asked Google Gemini, I think, a question about if you were to non-genderize Caitlyn
Caitlyn
Jenner
Jenner. Yeah.
versus have a nuclear apocalypse, which one would you choose? And obviously, I think one of the responses, and every time you type a query, you're going to get a different response from an LLM. But I think in that particular instance, the response came back and saying, nuclear apocalypse is preferred over non-gendering and genderizing that person. So anyway, that sort of thing, right? So it can be very unnerving for people when they're looking at it.
So I want to add one more point. uh, if you talk to people, so many of the arguments people say about biases, if you talk to people, humans are biased, and you might get that answer. You might get that answer if you go talk to a trans person who do not want to be misgenderized, or they're hurt by the world around them. They would choose the nuclear I can't say that. It feels like a tongue twister. So it's just different point of views on that, right? So
But
but
the thing is that
there is a yeah,
bias
there
is
is
an emotion, right? It's a thought, and every one of us has unconscious and conscious biases, and based on the experiences that we have lived, and so that is. But when it comes to AI and machine learning, bias is something that is actually translated into a mathematical formula, right? It's a variable that eventually affects the decision making of the neural network of the system that is making that decision. And how you determine bias and how kind of weights you put towards bias eventually determines how many decisions, what sort of decisions you make, and how many are positive and how many are negative. So that's something we'll get into as we talk about bias detection, bias mitigation. So, you want me to continue? You're on mute, Sudha. Yeah. So
yes, definitely, please go ahead.
so, um, we talked about this. There are racial biases, stereotypes, inaccuracies in LLM platforms, and the solution is not so straightforward. But one way to mitigate bias, obviously, to have a data set that is more inclusive and more reflective of a particular topic or a particular subject. And that's what we're doing over here in terms of making sure that first of all, the data set is more expansive and includes factual data about African American history and culture and heritage in order to expand the bias, reduce the inaccuracies and reduce the bias. And why is that important? Because African American history and culture is a very integral part of American culture. So it's important to make sure that it reflects in the mainstream culture and in tools like LLMs and searches, etc. The beta product is already out. I think you tried it out, Sudha. So it's the LLM is out. You can try it. You can go to Latimer.ai, sign up and try it out. There's a free version available. There's an API coming out soon, so that organizations can use it. We're working with many of the HBCUs from an education point of view to ensure that this is useful and effective. And the capabilities are, it's a superset of everything that ChatGPT has, except that it also has specific context and knowledge about Black history and Black culture and heritage, which is what makes it different. It does all the other things that LLMs, foundational LLMs do as well. And we talked a little bit about that, right? About how what's different about this is the way that we're training the data, the A/B testing that we're doing across different platforms, how the database is continuously augmented with new data. We're working with Morgan State University, the Center of Equitable AI. Gabriela Waters, who's a researcher there, is working closely with us to ensure that the bias mitigation and bias detection mitigation systems we put in place are reflective of all the academic research that has gone into it as well. And these are some of the sources we have here. I won't get into the details of that, but we have quite a few that we have secured already, and they're all licensed. Now, coming to the architecture, how did we build this? LLMs have been around for a while. And the first RAG architecture, I think, was developed in 2021 by Meta. And then since then, it's really taken off. And we've deployed a RAG model architecture here for ensuring that the data sets are reflective of the new data that we put in. And for those of you who don't know, it's retrieval augmented generation that really has three components: retrieval of data, new data that does not exist in the LLM that the model was not trained on initially. Augmentation is how you take the data that's been retrieved and then you augment it with a new query and send that to the LLM so that the LLM can generate a new response that is more reflective of the query and the contextual knowledge provided by the RAGs database. The technology stack is we started with OpenAI 3.5, but we're also going to be adding a few other open source LLMs, supporting a few other open source LLMs. The database we've used is Pinecone. We might be expanding that to single store, a few others, VectorX, etc. It's the back end and front end are built using React Native, Next.js, and Vercel, and the back end is really more of Firebase and Firestore in terms of the database. That's to speed up the whole development and make it easy to deploy.
So Malur, one of the things that typically, when I talk to companies, they're very excited about is they have somebody who's gone and played at the playground with OpenAI, and then that's how the whole idea of, okay, now we can build an LLM that's a chatbot that can do something useful for the company comes about, or even like startups do that, right? So your current model is built on OpenAI, so the GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is same as the Chat GPT, right? So that's how you have built out. So when you say now you want to move to other open source models, how do you make that? Because you've already built on it. If you're going to switch the data source or teach it more things, you can do RAG and add more data sources, right? But if you have a foundation LLM on which you have built, that's the thing that everybody is kind of worried about, saying, okay, now we start building more and more, we cannot switch the foundation model.
No,
So
you
any
can actually. That's a myth that you can't switch. It's actually not that hard to switch because when you think about the RAG architecture, right? If you go here, you look at the RAG architecture here. The LLM comes right at the end on the right side. You see it, right? Let me use my mouse. So the rest of it is all is the system is ours.
Yeah,
And really, if you want to switch out the LLM, it's not that hard to switch. All you need to do is switch the LLM from um, ChatGPT or 3.5 to 4. I mean, there are two ways to do it. One is obviously you can also, because the embedding model here that is used is also OpenAI embedding
yeah,
model,
yeah,
right? If you want to change the embedding model from OpenAI to a different one, let's say a Mistral open embedding model, you can do that, but that's a lot more work. But you don't have to do it. I mean, you can do it for more effectiveness because then the query is in the same format and same size of
yeah,
chunks, etc.
yeah,
Whereas when you look at so really it's the API the API calling that needs to change
yeah,
from the data that goes in when you get the data back from the vector database and send the query to the LLM. That's the part that needs to change when you're switching out LLMs. So the format of it, the function calling, and then um, OpenAI has something called Assistance API, which helps you with with add not just the function calling, but also helps you with the code evaluator and all those things, right? So that you need that to be added to the overall. So in order for you to switch out, you basically need to be able to replicate that same functionality onto the Mistral or Gemini or whatever else is you're using, Llama 3, Llama 2.
and are the open source models coming with that compatibility? Because
Yeah. I
what
mean,
I'm
if you
hearing
a good
is,
example is
yeah,
Perplexity, right? If you look at how
yeah,
Perplexity is implemented, you
yes,
can switch between models, and that's exactly what we intend to do. Is the user should be able to choose which model they want.
yeah. So in I end up usually showing the gpt.h2o.ai, which shows four different models, or you can choose four different models, and you can run the same query as a UI for people to see. On the back end, I've heard that there are more uh, flexible architecture that's being deployed, like the one you're saying, where you build on one, but you're building with that in mind, right? That I'm going to scale this so that it goes and it can talk to multiple other platforms. But there is some work on making sure that you cannot switch from calling OpenAI one day and then now you say, now I'm going to start calling Mistral or Llama 70B, right? You have to do some work on that middle layer so that the
Yeah,
query is
I'd say it's
packaged.
about a week to 10 days of work.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's not instantaneous, but you're right. In the sense that it's about maximum 2 weeks worth of work that in order to make sure that the beyond just the function calling, the other elements are also the code interpreter and all the other stuff
Yeah.
that's being used are also compatible.
Okay.
I mean, in software development, there is no such thing as a 5-minute job.
Yeah. No, that's what I keep thinking, because it looks straightforward and then people end up committing to a specific cloud, and if it's connected to Azure, it might kind of hide a lot of that complexity. And I find that very funny when people say call an API, it is no code. You're not really doing any coding. uh,
Well, yeah, you're right in some extent to some extent in that in the earlier when you're doing fine tuning, which is the other way, there's multiple ways to
yes.
skin this cat, right? You can upload directly onto ChatGPT. You can do fine tuning. or you can do the RAG model. In fine tuning, because a lot of it is all you're tied to the model very directly. You have to fine tune that specific model. So if you're going to switch models, then you need to fine tune the new model. And that can be a lot more time consuming, especially if the data sets are large.
Yeah.
I had a quick question. Hello.
Yes.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So are you saying that we are able to combine the data from two different models and then use it for your RAG? Or are you saying that we're just switching the models?
Switching the models, although
Mhm.
we have considered that as well, but that's going to add a whole new complexity to it, because
Exactly.
now you're talking about two different responses that you kind of need to integrate. And I mean, one of the things, so you can have two
Mm.
different responses from the same model, or you can have two different responses from two different models, right? But first of all, it's going to add a lot of latency to the whole platform. And secondly, yeah, you then let initially you will probably let the user decide which model, which response is more effective for their end use. But we could also have some sort of a tool that scans both those responses and say, here's the better response, combine the two, and then provide a response that's more that combines the two responses and gives you a more effective
Yeah.
one. Um,
Yeah.
so all of
No,
those are
this is
possible,
no,
but that's
this
not
is
what
very
we're doing today.
interesting. Yeah. So my background has been with search engine Alta Vista days. So we had a distributed data, and collecting the data from different distributed systems and combining them was something that's very interesting for me at that point of time.
Yeah, I
So
remember using Alta Vista. It was very popular before
yeah,
Google came along.
yeah. So we built it ground up. I was like the early employee. Anyway, I'll just get it back to you. But
Great, thank
that's
you.
a good thought. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Suresh.
And as we move forward, right? We are looking at so this is what we have built so far. Moving forward, we have a number of things to consider, especially given that we want the model to be to mitigate bias in its responses. And while it's effective, data is having relevant data is very important. So that's one differentiator, and make sure that that's one way to mitigate bias. The second one is the way you do the prompt engineering and fine tuning. That's important as well. But the third one is more, how do you make sure that over the long term, you're able to provide a clear explainability of the model? Because part of it is people who are using the model need to be say, here's why this response came out this way versus this response came out another way. Because I put in this type of request. It's important to be able to show people how the biases creep in, and how the responses are generated relative to the query and the weights that you use. So over here, you're looking at adding a couple of things excuse me. In addition to having storage, we're also looking at providing some memory, which I know ChatGPT is already doing, but having our own memory, so that we have the contextual data of the user, and maybe a more abstracted version if it's an organization, contextual data of the organization itself, to be able to feed that into the RAG model, and augment that, in addition to the data that comes from the RAG model, augment it with that information and be able to send it to the generator, which is the LLM. And here's where observability comes into play. If you're passing all of those every step of the way, if you're able to pass that on to a tool that observes your outputs at every step, then you're able to explain that later on, how what happened from this stage from one one phase to another phase. And that's our long-term plan, is to be able to provide that.
So I have
And
a very basic question.
Yeah.
I see every lot of people going to Llama Index or LangChain. So did you not go that route, or you had to make selection of different kind of RAG options and go build that out?
I mean, we looked at Llama index and LangChain, but I think it was a little bit more cumbersome. We wanted speed. Obviously, one of the things was important for us to be able to deliver an MVP as quickly as possible, and that's why we went with the OpenAI model, because OpenAI, with the especially with the assistance API and the tools that they have built in, it makes it very, very simple, and integrates very well with Pinecone. So we have a couple of lead developers who are experienced in Pinecone, and the choice was more related to what experience they had, and Pinecone has a pretty good, as long as you're, because our data set we were only gonna be using vector database. We're not, initially at least, we were not using any Postgres or anything else, or any SQL. So we didn't have a mix of data a mix of different types of databases to worry about. Eventually, we may look at other options like single store and Vectera, etc.
Sorry, would you mind telling us a little bit about the different kind of, you just said single store and stuff, but can you just explain for the person who's not familiar with RAG, except that, we've had LangChain demos come in Weeklywed sometime back. And we know that you can add a data source, and I show that with H2O, saying, here, take in my book, and now you can query and talk with it.
Yeah,
With
LangChain is more for the embeddings and creating the vectorization, etc. Right? That's
yeah,
what you use,
yeah,
to create the chunks and for
yeah.
create the embeddings, and but uh, if a faster way to do that is to simply use the OpenAI on the embeddings tools that are already provided by the large language model. Uh, right? So you have in terms of the vector database itself, there are multiple technologies. There's Vector X by Google. There's ChromaDB, which is free. Um, Pinecone, which is relatively inexpensive in the early stages. Single store is a little bit more expensive, but uh, I think they're one of the newer ones, and they're good because they also allow you to have multiple types of data stores. So when you're scaling beyond, if we were to have 100,000 or a million users, then then we would consider moving from Pinecone to something else, all right, to something like a single store, where you're able to minimize the number of tokens and queries that are going out, and optimizing for search, and optimizing based on semantic search, as opposed to just lexical and search.
So are you doing, when you go, so the thing with RAG is it's two sides, right? One, it takes in data sources, but how fast it does the retrieval, so you have low latency, so you have kind of architected optimally for your kind of queries and users, right? So are
Yeah,
you
there's a
doing
number of.
that
Sorry,
piece?
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Are you doing that piece where you're getting the queries from users, and then you're saying, okay, let me park this in some temporary database because they are and then find out what are similar queries, and then make one call to the LLM?
No, I mean, you can't do that, right? You have, once the query comes in, you immediately first check whether the context is relevant to the RAG.
Yeah,
If it's not, then you just send it as is, because if that information is not in the RAG,
yeah.
then you send that query directly as part of the um, augmentation. You send it directly to um, the LLM, and but fine tune the query by saying, here's the context you need to provide, and here's how you need to respond, and then the response comes in. But you don't actually have any data, because the RAG doesn't have any relevant data. So if I ask Latimer, hey, who won the Super Bowl last year? Right? It's not in the RAG model. It's in the large language model. So it's not very unlike how other enterprise RAGs are built, in that
Yeah.
contextual information that's specific to an enterprise, or specific to or even ones that are using the internet, right? How do you, before I go generate a response from the LLM, I go do a web search, get it contextual information, feed that into and augment that, and then feed that into the LLM. That's how Perplexity works.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
So I wanted to get, since we have limited time, I wanted to get into the whole bias mitigation and how we are tackling it, right? The first thing to recognize is in as far as bias is concerned is how do you make sure that you have to define the objectives of what bias uh, um, is, and how you then you can determine how you detect it, how you mitigate for it, how you mitigate the bias. So accurate representation of Black history and culture is important given the context that we're building this for. Um, it needs to mitigate biases and improve inclusivity while maintaining explainability. I talked about that, right? Being able to show trace how the responses are coming out so that we can take action and improve over time. And it also needs to ensure that it's enabling equitable communication and interactions between the model and the user. And we're looking at accounting for race-based bias, gender-based bias, cultural bias to start with. And the most important thing is to make sure it's context aware and has transparency and explainability in the model. And our approach is, at a high level, we're looking at defining bias and fairness criteria, right? What are the critical elements of bias and fairness? Curate diverse training data. And when we talked about the data a little bit, but let me delve into the data specifics in terms of the three dimensions of data that we need to ensure. There's accuracy, there's completeness, and there's accessibility. And all three of them need to be covered when you're looking at data. If the data is complete but not accurate, then you need to change the weights accordingly. And that's where the model training and development comes into play. We're looking at, we haven't done this yet, but we're working on adversarial testing so that we have maybe a small language model that is focused on, that is built with, both biased and unbiased versions of the text, and be able to play that back and with the model. And that's for training purposes, so that the model can be trained with this adversarial LLM. And then obviously measuring outputs for bias and accuracy, and then I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the metrics that we're looking at, and this and then iterate that over time and refine that. And probably every month or every couple of months also do a bias audit to make sure that more at the system level there are nothing that we're missing. There's model quality ranking, which is a empty bench score that's available, that looks at 3 or 4 different parameters in terms of quality, in terms of some of the things I mentioned, completeness, accuracy, as well as accessibility, right? And then look at historical and cultural accuracy. And some of this will have to be done both a combination of manual and automated, right? Automated, you can feed 1,000 different prompts to it and get the responses, and then score that based on certain criteria. But that's and then you still need human oversight to be able to understand whether the responses are adhering to some of the principles that you've put in place.
So I have a question.
And we constantly also do comparisons with other LLMs, right? So we show what does ChatGPT show, what does Latimer show, what does Gemini show for the same question.
Malur, I have a question. When you talk about the fairness metrics, there has been extensive research and work on looking at data and coming up with fairness metrics, like IBM 360 is one of the top ones, right? So did you go and look at one of the metrics from IBM Fairness 360 and bring it in here. I mean, it looks like a lot of work. I mean, the intention and approaches you're taking seems very time intensive. So is there something, and I heard that IBM Fairness 360 has expanded to do something with LLMs. I've not had a chance to dig deeper on that.
Yeah.
So
So we're look.
is there
So
some standard out there that you can use?
we're still in the process of doing it, but we are using a combination of Hugging Face has the evaluate uh, um, uh, uh, model that you can use to test for bias. But and IBM's Fairness 360 and Watson Scale are both models that you can use for using that test for the fairness metrics in terms of different types of biases. You can set the parameters around gender bias or under racial bias or other types of stereotypes, other types of bias, and and then you can run the model and it'll give you a score. And then you can, one of the things we like doing is creating a bias coefficient to say, for every response, um, based on those parameters that you determine, certain words, certain characters, the tone of tone of the response, etc. You can determine a bias coefficient, and then the bias coefficient ratio, which is the ratio of two bias coefficients for two different responses, determines the relative bias, and which is what we'll use, to determine to feed back into the system and be able to reduce be able to mitigate bias. So that's the feedback loop. We haven't built it yet into the system, but that's something we're working on in terms of determining how we mitigate bias over time as we feed that back into the. So there are a number of other tools like I think Galileo is very good for explainability because it dissects and uh, gives you the information at every step of the way as far as a RAG model is concerned. Fiddler AI has specific tools for detecting bias as well.
Yeah.
So that's something we're evaluating. And then we're also looking at the concept of attention weights. How can we change the attention weights within the RAG model to be able to feed the right type of response, and also at the same time also be able to influence the larger LLM.
So Fiddler AI is one we have looked at, and I don't believe this happened at Weekly Bed, but I had attended one of their sessions where they'd built their own chatbot for looking at their help documentation. And they were talking about what the earlier question I was asking, right? When you query the LLM, instead of taking the user query and just going directly to the LLM, whether it is RAG or not, but to spool that and find similar queries so that you can just make one query
Right.
and reduce the latency time essentially. So that was one of their approach. So
Yeah.
it's
No, I remember that.
yep.
So that's something to look into as well. And really, working with. We've got a few partnerships, and the one that I like to call out is really, as far as bias is concerned, is working with the folks Kofi and Professor Kofi, and also with uh, uh, Professor Gabriela Waters, who runs who both run the Center for AI Ethics at Morgan State, and they are involved obviously at also at the federal level in terms of determining the guidelines for ethical AI. So it's a great partnership, and they've developed something called they developed their own version of um, uh, a metrics called decision value scores, um, and it's interesting in that decision value scores that they've tabled is a new set of metrics for determining AI, and it takes into account a number of factors like being able to um, look at accessibility, look at being able to, how democratic is it, um, and look at a variety of different parameters, and then be able to score on each of those parameters, and it takes the ratio of that and then says, hey, here's how you can actually determine here's how you're scoring on the entire premise is that the number of positive decisions you make that the system makes should be greater than the number of negative decisions it makes when it comes to bias.
So
So
this looks almost like the Fairness 360, one of the metrics of Fairness 360, right? There are ways of arriving at a aggregate score, but based on your population or the segment of your customers, that um, even the number of negative scores might be detrimental to your business or to a population, right? So,
yeah, I
uh,
think the difference here is I think they take more into account the cognitive and the psychology aspect of it as well, and then try to quantify that into a number that can be
yeah.
compared.
So we had, out of the various benchmarks that typically are comparing LLMs, it's lots is most based on performance. So it's a good first step to, compare them based on bias. However, the bias is refined, that's actually a good step. In Global South in AI, we actually train researchers and bring them to NeurIPS to present posters at NeurIPS. And one of our presenters this time was a poster which said all the evaluation, the dashboards that are showing comparing LLMs are very biased with the Western lens. So if the data is trained with internet data, and then if it is being checked on just a set of different definition of bias, again with the Western lens, it kind of defies the purpose. And so this person, I think his name is Sundar Narayan, he ended up creating a audit tool that would actually look for cultural bias from a Southeast Asian perspective or an Asian perspective. I don't remember the scope of his project, but it was a little bit more broader, but it still leaves a lot of room for rest of the world. So I'll connect you with people afterwards, and especially for
No, that
those
would be
of
great.
you.
I mean, I think
Yeah,
I welcome anybody that's wants to get involved in this project, in this endeavor. This is not a problem that's easy to solve.
yeah.
I wish I had all the answers. We don't. We're working with some of the researchers, like I mentioned, and the more heads that are working on this, the easy. You can see even companies like Gemini, all the big LLM providers are struggling with this concept. So it's not a trivial problem to solve, but in the context of what we are trying to do, I think it can be mitigated and solved to some extent.
So I heard about enterprise companies when they're building a solution, actually create a whole validation model, like a module on validation. So the LLM comes out, and then before it goes to the user, they want to mitigate bias or scope
Yeah.
their compliancy on that.
Well, there's something called
Yeah,
agent-based, agents, right? So what
yeah,
they're putting a layer between the LLM and the user,
yeah,
and the agent then takes the query. It will, if the query itself is biased, it might change the query to be the tone of the query or the language of the query and send it to the LLM, get the response, and then it will curate that response and feed it back um, to the user, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
with the agent-based LLM, it's going to add more latency for sure. But also, the benefit is that if you, especially for enterprises, it prevents you from sending information out to the public domain that you don't want it to, or you don't want it to send responses that are not aligned with the company policy or whatever.
Yeah. No, it seems like a lot of almost like we are saying we have gone away from the rule based systems to AI and machine learning, and now with transformer based LLMs, and then to this mitigation piece in an almost rule based way. Seems like
Well, we're
too
trying to
much.
introduce a rule-based structure into the LLMs, right?
Yeah,
That's the challenge, because
yeah,
the LLMs are kind of have the life of their own in terms of how they respond,
yeah,
because they don't have the contextual knowledge of how they're responding.
yeah. And to go back and say that you're going to change the weights on the LLM is almost like fine tuning, right? You're saying you're not fine tuning, but you're ended up saying the last layer I'm going to change the bias and weights based on my data set, which is essentially fine tuning. So it seems like a lot of dev work, and manual rule based, and it depends on who is doing it and their
It's like,
definition.
we went from cable to streaming, and now streaming, everyone has their own subscription. Now everybody is going back to almost cable.
Yeah. So for those of you who are watching, if you're working in the space and if you're trying to build a validation engine for your product or your own LLM, here's the contact. So we'll be happy to connect you, and it'll be wonderful to build something out. I would like to see something in open source that is like the IBM Fairness 360. That is, bias mitigation, which is a lot more inclusive. And Susanna was here a little while back. She has research published on inclusive construct. So maybe, instead of making it rule based, to make it more
Yeah, I would love to talk
more
to her. I
broader.
think one of the things we are trying to do is build a bias mitigation, a detection and mitigation tool that can be applied to any tool, almost like a Chrome plugin, or have it as simple as that, where any text that you have, we can give you a bias score for that, and be able to kind of like what Grammarly does for grammar.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think we're reaching the end of the hour. Do you want to stop this share so we can just see you
Yeah,
and say thank you? Yeah.
thanks, appreciate it.
So this is wonderful. I mean, I think the best presentations are the one that get us thinking that we want more, and that you've done exactly that. And the building of the LLM plus the bias mitigation is two topics, and you've covered a lot of stuff today. So we appreciate your time and the discussion. Before I close out, I want to see if anybody has some burning question that they're going to come and talk to me afterwards. I want to make sure that you speak up now. I see a comment. I see a question from Stephen saying, "Does Latimer has some stuff in Hugging Face?"
We did initially, but now we moved to our own platform. We had a model on Hugging Face initially, before we had the MVP out.
Okay, so I think the thinking is that they can access and play with it. So maybe if Stephen Moore is follows up directly, you'll be open with that, right? Open to do that. Okay. Stephen, I think you can follow up directly and see whether you can get access, or do something on with Latimer, and
All right,
I'll put
thank
you in
you.
touch. Yes.
All right,
Okay.
thank you very much. Yeah. I wanted
Yes.
to try some local languages on it and see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, so even like one of my work is focused on more global South languages, and see how we
Yeah,
can. So the embeddings, we cannot use OpenAI's embeddings because it won't work for
yeah,
any of the languages I'm even looking at. And
yeah.
Susanna and I are working on a project with Ine Yankee on Bari language from South Sudan. So we're kind of starting ground up to go build everything.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that'll be awesome. There's another question, comment, I believe, from Rene saying many cultures and ethnic minorities have never documented their history in written form, or the records may have been destroyed over time. As a result, their voices may never be captured in LLM and thus remain unheard. How do you address this issue? This is
I
the
think
one
you've
that
got
we
to
are
look at
dealing
books.
with in Bari. So go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, you got to look at what are the there are books, any form of documentation, historical documents that might exist. Anything, you got to take that and try and put it. I mean, there's no other answer to that, right?
So, can I jump in and say one thing? Because one of the things we are trying, and I don't want to take credit for this, we are helping Ine Yankee's team, because they came in with an early research on this as a poster in New Rips from Global South in AI, and now we are working with them to say, can we train a local group so that they can go build out their own data set. So I believe that's one example. Bari language from South Sudan, all their historic data got destroyed by colonization, right? And so the only record that is available is a Jehovah Witness Bible, which the local community doesn't want to use. So there is a whole effort, and then they found out that there are letters that are personal letters that has been written in Bari that is sitting among citizens out there. So there's a concerted effort, ground up, almost grassroots. And one of the approach we are taking is, can we get this set of girls we are going to teach to write poetry and create new content, and then create translation for that, and create that instruction pair between Bari and English. And then we are kind of going through the whole thing of, then we have to do the embedding and vectorization, and then go talk to an
Yeah, I
talk
think
to
that's a
an
larger historical problem, in that being able to uncover those stories is important, right? And it's, um, I mean, that's happened in every country. Is every country that's invaded another country or occupied that have erased the past, lots of records of the past.
yeah.
Um, and the only way to uncover that is to go interview the people who are still alive, and document it.
So one of the things, at least I'm a big optimist. So one of the things that I'm finding that is helpful is instead of thinking of this as a bigger problem that somebody needs to document and give the whole set of data set, one of the things that we are finding from our work from Global South in AI is local communities are not thinking about, okay, let's go get all our history back and documentation, and not everybody is dedicating their life for that. They want to get into this whole AI bandwagon and go do things. And so what we are finding is people want to solve specific problem for that local community. So in the case of the Bari language, they are all learning and they do engineering and build IoT and learn in English, right? And when we go to them and say, do you need Bari language? Who speaks? And they say the rural women speak Bari language. And there are refugees in refugee camps around the country, not in that country, but in Uganda and other places, who speak only Bari. And so we said, okay, can we build a machine translation for the refugees and what they would need in the camps to get help? So we take a very small slice of use case. Based on that, we would build the data set for it. And then we will build the machine translation. And then hopefully once the local community is trained on AI, they can go and expand this to more and more use cases, which is relevant for them. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to have a general purpose, let's talk to the chatbot for everything. They don't need a chat GPT. They just need problem solved with AI on a very specific use case so that they get the power of AI and they solve their problems. So that's been our approach. If anybody doesn't have any more question, I have to let the speaker go.
Feel free to. Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions.
Okay. And for those of you who are here, we've added like a community on Weeklywed at Business School of AI, from where you sign up. And we'll send you the information on that so you can come in and have a conversation, because I've been promising to share the deck every time or connect with people, and I have individuals just talking to me. So I would like you guys to talk to each other and maybe Paria. And thank you, Paria, for helping me set this up and do everything quietly behind the scenes. I appreciate that. She's at college, so she's not joining us live at this time typically. With that, I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to stop the live stream. For those of you who are coming back and watching the live stream, that happens typically on LinkedIn. I've not done justice to go and share the latest because I got very excited listening and learning right here. So I'll come and post some of the links there that I've shared here on the chat. But so two things. If you are on LinkedIn, feel free to tag a friend, come back, ask questions, and we will tag Malur and make sure that we get our answers, right? At least our pointers to get started. And Malur, I'm not speaking for you, but you said you want to work with local, not with global researchers, right? So if AI researchers are working in the space, you're happy to connect with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to connect with anyone, but if you would like to come, help us get involved, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, I
Particularly,
think that
yeah.
there's a whole Masakane team on Slack, and they're like a force. I don't think there is anything that they don't know about LLMs. When I go to those Slack groups on every possible language, and that creates different kind of innovation opportunities to build stuff like you were talking about, how to take multiple RAG options and how to keep the embedding from one and then switch the LLM models. They've done a lot of that from the data and getting it and all that stuff. So I hope that I'll be able to connect you with them. And so if you're watching this on LinkedIn, tag and ask your question. We'll get you answers. You can connect with Malur Narayan directly. I'll make sure that I put his LinkedIn also there. And for those of you who are here, part of the Weeklywed community on businessschoolofai.teachable.com, that's our longer URL, where you already are signed up on Weeklywed. We have this new community feature. You can come in and we'll make sure we get you the deck and we can, drive some conversations and help each other out. Okay. With that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks a lot, Sudha.
I'll see you next.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
We'll be in touch. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to stop the share. Thank you, everybody.